Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I have found that this week off has completely thrown off my mental calendar. Last week it felt like we were constantly 2 days behind where we should be because we were leaving on Thursday morning. This week we got back on Monday night. There's no game. We've had no interviews. I don't know. I keep looking at the calendar and going, what day is it again? This is very disorienting. The weekend off is probably going to be nice, but it is, we can only do these so often because otherwise I'll forget where I am.
No, I'm with you because the schedule that we have during the season is kind of like the guardrails of bowling, basically. Like without this, I'm in the gutter, but literally, figuratively, without the schedule at the WAC, you can just find me all over the place, and I don't know days, times where I'm supposed to be. But I'm napping more than ever this week. I'm sure everybody's gonna be fantastic to find that out as we wait for the week to begin. But it is. We'll get to the show, Tom. But there's this thing called jet lag. I don't know if people know about it, and the time zones. I can understand why teams are losing going across the country. Just personally, I've lost. I know that.
Yeah, it has definitely been a week where my body clock is way off. We really tried to stay on East Coast time for the most part, which involved me waking up and sitting in hotel lobbies at like 4 a.m. out on the West Coast. And yet somehow we got back here and I'm still all wonky. So yeah, it's, I get it. Like I understand why they give teams a week off after they travel cross country.
Yeah. So we have not been able to talk to Ryan Day this week, but he did have his weekly radio show today. So he mentioned some things in there that we're going to cover here. And the thing we're going to start with are the injuries to Josh Simmons and Will Kacmarek. I believe Paul Keels or Jim Lachey, the two hosts of the radio show, mentioned, injuries and is everybody going to be back? And Day said it will be a while for Simmons and Kacmarek. And so I tweeted that out, and some people took that as a positive sign, like, oh, maybe Josh Simmons will be back. And Tom, I'm just going to ask you, when Ryan Day says something will be a while in terms of an injury, do you see that as a positive sign, or is that just him not wanting to say it's a season ender? Because I did not take it as a positive sign, even with whatever tone he used, and there was nothing specific. But will be a while for Ryan Day generally means, all the while.
Means something between a month and the heat death of the universe is generally how I take it. And the fact that he didn't specify anything beyond that, especially vis-a-vis Simmons. Simmons, he basically said they weren't expecting him to get him back during this season after the game. And the fact that he didn't say, well, we got some good news on him and it's still going to be a while, but we can follow up with him next week when we get a chance to see him in person. But yeah, I think people are looking for good news right now, and that would certainly be good news. But I feel like if it was actually good news, it probably would have been spelled out in a little more detail than it was.
Yeah. And so he was then asked, what's the plan right now at left tackle? And talked about the options. I don't know if it was Jim or Paul saying, you've got, George Fitzpatrick is now moves up a spot from like the number 3 to the number 2 backup or whatever. And Day also mentioned, well, you got Donnie too, in terms of Donovan Jackson. He mentioned Tegris Ebola, but they're going to go with Zen Michalski for now. That's what they're going right now at left tackle. Zen Michalski. He's the guy that came in when Josh Simmons went down, played the rest of the game. And we have talked about the fact that they always go with their 5 best, their best 5. And the best 5 for this team right now would probably involve Austin Siereveld. But when the guy that you're replacing is the left tackle, how much change do you want there to be over the rest of the line? Or do you just want it to be that one left tackle to come in? And so for continuity's sake, Tom, to me, this is, I guess, thinking about it, maybe the first move you make to see if it will work. And then if it doesn't work in practice, then like, okay, now we have to shake some things up. But answer me that one, and then were you surprised that they decided to go with Zen Michalski right off the bat?
Yeah, I was a little surprised because it feels like you look at the best five, and as you said, that's usually the benchmark that they use. So you look at the best five, pretty clearly, without Simmons, Sierreveld is one of the best five because they were rotating only 6 guys, and he was one of the 6 guys they were rotating. So it feels like your best five includes Austin Sierreveld if it doesn't include Josh Simmons. So that was a little surprising. And then you also have who's the 6th best right now. You've got to figure it's probably Carson Hinsman. He started all of last year. You feel like he's probably, of your top 7 before Simmons got hurt, it's probably Sierreveld and Hinsman. So to go outside of that, yeah, I think you've got it exactly right. They are trying to avoid having to replace multiple starters or have different, multiple guys in different positions. Because sure, you could kick Josh Fryer over from right tackle to left tackle if you wanted to, but then you got to replace your right tackle. So then you're replacing 2 spots. You could kick Donovan Jackson over from left guard to left tackle, but obviously you're replacing 2 spots there as well. I think there's a possibility you end up with Donovan Jackson at left tackle and Austin Sierreveld at left guard. They tried Sierreveld at tackle at times this summer. The fact that that's not the option they're going with, that tells me that they looked at that this summer and went, it's probably not the best option either. So I guess the virus that was going through that room over the summer, they got a chance to kind of mix and match some different pieces because you had kind of almost random guys out different days. So you got to really try different combinations. So they're probably a little further along than they would be normally in this case. To me, Zen Michalski at left tackle feels like, this is the least disruptive of the potential options. So we're going to try that, see how it works. If it doesn't work, then you'll go with something else. But this is the one that I don't know that they know that it's going to work, but I think it's the one they're hoping is going to work because it potentially screws with everything else a little bit less.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope. And we know Zen Michalski went with the ones all spring in 2023, and they went desperately looking for a solution to that problem in the portal. Landed Josh Simmons. Michalski now back with the ones. I think so. Yeah, that is the path of least resistance or the path of least noise. But then it's not like moving Donovan Jackson or Taylor Shabola to left guard creates a gigantic issue either, provided they can handle that position, because Austin Sierreveld has played both of those guards in games, and he's essentially almost been a co-starter at times this season. So you would think that wherever he were to go in, they would continue to be the continuity would be disrupted, not much. It's just a matter of, can Donovan Jackson, can Taylor Shabola play left tackle? And if you decide to go that way, then your entire lineup is guards and centers. And not that Zen Michalski is an NFL tackle, but he's at least a tackle. And I think Josh Fryer, most people believe, is the next level is probably a guard. And we've seen it before at Ohio State where, was it 2018 or whatever, they had 5 tackles essentially playing on the offensive line. They've gone with too many guards, and now you lose Josh Simmons, and he was the only legitimate, this guy is a tackle in the lineup, and now you're again deciding on a bunch of guards, which is that's a recruiting thing. We even saw Luke Montgomery as a true freshman battling for the right tackle spot last year, and now he's more of an interior guy. But the hope clearly is that Zen Michalski can handle it. You've got enough time to figure that out. And then, I think today, Thursday, is their last real practice of the week. They'll have Friday and Saturday kind of off. Sunday, they'll be back. But they need to know pretty quickly whether or not Michalski can handle it. And what is the threshold for handling it? Where does he need to be? Is there a grade that he needs to hit, or is it just a feel like, this might work against Nebraska, but it's not going to work against Penn State. And if it's not going to work against Penn State, let's make the move right now. Or do you let him get another game of action? Because he got almost 3 quarters against Oregon I wonder how much more they need to see before they're like, yes, this is what we're doing, or we wanted it to work. It's not going to work. Now the next move has to be made.
Well, I think the standard is the standard. So the standard is what is going to be good enough to win the national championship. And that is good enough, but it's also, that's a pretty high standard. And frankly, I don't know if there is an answer on this team that is clearly, definitively, yes, this is a national championship offensive line. I think Josh Simmons, we said it over the summer. Josh Simmons, we said it earlier in the fall. Josh Simmons, we said it as soon as he went down. Josh Simmons was the guy they could not afford to lose. If Seth McLaughlin goes down, you do have Carson Hintzman, who played center last year. If you lost one of your other guards, you do have someone else who you could slide in there. Your right tackle, if Josh Fryer went down instead, yeah, your right tackle is very important, and they still don't have really a third true tackle on this team. But, just any team in the world would rather lose the guy protecting their quarterback's front side rather than his blind side. That's just, Michael Lewis wrote a book about that. That's just how it goes generally with offensive line construction. So I don't know that there is an actual answer here. They have to have an answer. It might not be a great answer, but they have to have an answer. I don't know that they have a great answer. I don't know that they have an answer that is, this will be a great answer against Georgia or Alabama or Penn State or Oregon the next time or whatever. That may just not be. They may have to get creative now and just sort of try and make something work. I think they are desperately hoping that Zen Michalski will be good enough. And if Zen Michalski is good enough to beat Nebraska and Indiana and Northwestern and Purdue and Michigan, and your tests, and then you have to just sort of piece it together for Penn State and, Oregon Part 2 or whoever you're playing in the college football playoff, you may just have to sort of piece it together. You can maybe get around it to a certain degree with some creative play calling. You can maybe get around to it to a certain degree with sliding a tight end over there or having a running back help out or whatever, but you're going to have to figure it out. You may just have to get creative, and they have play callers who can do that. But yeah, I genuinely am not sure if there is a real, true, definitely here's a good answer on this roster right now.
I'm not going to be shocked if Taker Shabola eventually starts at left tackle for the Buckeyes. We've heard talk about his athleticism and the way he should move as well as he does for a big man. And if that's the case, then why not put him at tackle? He's tackle sized. So if everybody's so impressed with his athleticism, maybe the best place for him would be left tackle. And then you can leave Donovan Jackson where he is and put Austin Seerveld where he's played his most snaps as a Buckeye, which is right guard. So we'll see where that goes. Helping out with the tight ends in the blocking game has taken a hit with Will Kacmarek being out for a while. And Ryan Day didn't go into detail on whether one was more significant than the other in terms of Simmons' injury, Kacmarek's injury. We saw him leave the game after his quote unquote catch there down the middle of the field. Bennett Christian then came in for him. And something that has happened the last 3 weeks is Bennett Christian is playing more than Jelani Thurman and a lot more this past week. They need him to continue to step up. We saw G. Scott make some catches in this one. But now they need Jelani Thurman to pick it up, because now that he's been passed essentially by Bennett Christian, and there's no other way to, I don't know, maybe he was banged up this past week, but now that Bennett Christian has apparently surpassed him, Jelani Thurman can't just sit back and be like, oh, gosh darn, because there are opportunities to play, and they need him to play. So the tight end situation right now, losing Kacmarek puts them in another bind in a number of ways. I mean, you just saw him used down the middle of the field in the Oregon game. That's seemingly where Jelani Thurman could do some things. They like Bennett Christian's physicality and his ability to block. When you're down, I would say the two most physical blockers would be Kacmarek and Christian. And when you're down one of those guys, and you're left with G. Scott, who gives it everything he has, Jelani Thurman, who has yet to, we've talked about the light needing to stay on the entire time. It flickers and it's on, but it needs to stay on. They really need it to stay on now.
They really do, but I mean, if you look at the trend in the snaps this year, it's very clear that Jelani Thurman and Bennett Christian are going in two different directions right now. Thurman had more snaps than Christian in the first 3 games of the season. The 4th game against Michigan State, Christian had 12, Thurman had 11. And then the last 2 weeks, Bennett Christian's had 33, Jelani Thurman has had 9. It was 20-2 last weekend in Eugene. So that's pretty clearly they are looking at Bennett Christian and going, he does more of the things that you need right now. I think Thurman is probably a more dynamic receiver, but that's not really what they're looking for out of the tight end position right now. They need a guy who can put his face into a defensive end or put his face into a linebacker and drive him off the ball, help in the run game. It's all the really unsexy stuff. That's what they're looking for right now. And to me, this is one of these things where they can tell me whatever they want. Look at the snap counts. You can say whatever you want. What are you doing? And what you're doing is you're telling me that Bennett Christian is someone they trust way more than Jelani Thurman right now. If Jelani Thurman can develop into that kind of a blocker, I'm sure they would love to have him out there. But very clearly, they don't feel that he is that guy right now. So is that something you can pick up that much during the course of the season? That feels like something that's almost an off-season, hey, you need to put in more time in the weight room. Hey, you need to put in more time on the practice field. Hey, you need to, that is not something you can necessarily just flip a switch and instantly become a better blocker. Tight end is a very, very developmental position because it's not that easy to do. So that's one where I think the trend is not your friend right now if you're Jelani Thurman. And I don't think that's something you're just going to magically be able to change tomorrow unless they decide that the receiving end piece of the tight end position is something they really, really need. If they lose a wide receiver, yeah, maybe that changes things a little bit. But right now, with offensive line being probably the single biggest concern, I think the blocking piece of the tight end position is the biggest thing they're going to need to fill. And especially with Will Kacmarek out, he was their best blocking tight end, it felt like. So that feels like that's going to be more time for Bennett Christian more than anything else.
And we're talking about this and the receiving aspect of it. I know there are people screaming about, well, it was Bennett Christian. It went, 56 yards or 58 yards or whatever it was on a screenplay. So he has certainly abilities there. He's also a year older than Jelani Thurman. So he's been a year longer in the weight room and all of that. And as much as they need Jelani Thurman to step up, they obviously need Bennett Christian to continue to step up. And I don't care if he catches another pass this season. They need him in the run blocking area because as we saw in this game, the run blocking and the running game itself wasn't good enough. I think 4.3 yards per carry overall, but the running backs outside of the 2 long runs, 2 yards a carry, that's never going to get it done. So you need a consistent blocking tight end, and whether that's G. Scott, whether that's, Bennett Christian, when they're into 12 personnel doing both of that, they need more from those guys to help out the running backs. And when we talked about the running game, Ryan Day discussed basically the three areas, the 3 reasons that they lost to Oregon. So he said the number one reason was they lost the turnover battle. You can't do that on the road. Technically, it was only 1-0, but that's not counting the squib kick that cost Ohio State a possession, which Day did say they practiced that play earlier in the week leading up to that game. There's just only so much you can do in terms of you can't back off too far because they could just dribble it. He said you have to prepare for a bunt in a line drive, and the line drive was perfect. And so the one thing that maybe you can do that they've coached them up to do now or that they had coached them up to do is just reduce your surface area. So don't stand like this, stand, shoulders out, stand more of a sideways base basically to leave less area for that kick. But it was a perfect kick. And then it bounced right back to Oregon. It was another, as we talked about in the rewatch of the game, another bounce right back to the Ducks. And when you're talking about a game of inches, it's also a game of bounces. So number one, got to win the turnover battle. Number 2, they lost the rushing attack. That was the second reason they lost. And they didn't lose it by much. Oregon rushed for, I think, 14 more yards. and they averaged five yards a carry to Ohio State's 4.3. And then the third was the explosives. And technically, explosive plays would be a 10-yard rush or more and a 15-yard reception or more. Ohio State actually won that 14-10, but it was a case of M80s versus dynamite, and Ohio State was with the M80s. Oregon was with the dynamite. They definitely lost that. So those three areas are really what cost them. And they didn't lose it by much, but they lost all three of them and still came up 1 point short on the road against a very good team.
Yeah, you lost all three of them. And then there's some but in there with, but that doesn't, as you said, it didn't include the kickoff. It also didn't include the real unforced errors like the drop snap on the third down and 3rd and 2 right at the end of the third quarter. That's one that it wasn't a turnover because they did get to punt the ball away, but also, boy, you really kind of handed Oregon a drive. You handed Oregon a couple possessions where 3rd and 2, you've got to convert that. And 3rd and 1, Travion Henderson bouncing it outside instead of just sticking his nose up there and getting the first down. You just, either one of those, you've got the ball at your own 35-yard line in both of those cases. But if you pick up either of those first downs, Oregon didn't stop Ohio State on any drives without getting a lot of help from Ohio State in the last 3 quarters of the game, basically. Second half, they only had 4 possessions. One was a touchdown, one was a field goal, one was the dropped snap, and then the one was the clock hit 0 at the end of the game. Oregon did not force a punt from the Buckeyes in the second half. And then before halftime, the possession right before that, other than the kneel down, the possession right before that was the one where Henderson didn't pick up the first down, even though it was right there, and he just needed to kind of have the situational awareness to get there. The Buckeyes really, it sounds like you're making excuses, or it sounds like you're taking things away from Oregon. What did Oregon do to make Travion Henderson not just run forward for a yard when he could have run forward for a yard on 3rd and 1? Nothing. There was no one there. It was just, he just needed to just go forward, and he didn't do it. What did they do to make Will Howard not catch the snap? Nothing. There was not incredible pressure going in his face. He just didn't catch the snap. You had just some unforced errors like that on top of the big plays, on top of the losing the turnover battle, on top of, the ball that Will Howard drops as a snap, bounce, he has to fall on it and that kills the drive. The ball that Dylan Gabriel has go over his head, he picks it up on a bounce, and it's much less of a devastating play. So just a bunch of little stuff that added up here and there. I know that people are really irritated by a lot of that stuff, and that everyone is sure that the world is the sky is falling right now. You have to look at that and go, is all of that stuff going to go wrong again next time? Not that everything went right for Oregon. Oregon missed a PAT. Oregon missed a field goal. Oregon had a bunch of stuff that didn't go right as well. But Oregon did get a lot of the 50-50 balls kind of went Oregon's way. And I think Oregon would be hard pressed to hit as many big plays through the passing game as they did on Saturday. Ohio State was much more in line with what they've typically done in the passing game. It was not, a remarkable outlier performance in the passing game for the Buckeyes. It was not a remarkable outlier performance in the running game for the Buckeyes. It feels like Oregon played a, A- kind of game. It wasn't perfect. B+, A- game. Ohio State played like a B- B kind of game, and that was the difference, 1 point. So I think I saw a lot of people very irritated that Day doesn't feel there need to be like enormous structural changes or anything, that kind of stuff. But they lost by 1 point on the road, and all that stuff went wrong. Is all that stuff going to go wrong again if they play in Indianapolis? You would assume not everything would go wrong, and that might be enough. If just one fewer of those things goes wrong in Indianapolis, that might be enough to swing the outcome.
That doesn't guarantee that new things wouldn't go wrong, but yeah, I'm with you. There are enough areas where Ohio State can just fix relatively minor things and just not have this happen, and you'll be okay, especially in Indianapolis or wherever else it might be. A couple of other things that Day talked about. He was asked about the 12-man call and the NCAA changing the rule to give the offense the option to put time back on the clock. He did ask the Big Ten if we would have called timeout, would there have been a penalty? And they said no. basically the only way there'd be like a pre-snap penalty is if Oregon had done it twice in a row, which, I guess at that point it's unsportsmanlike. It's, you're really trying to push the issue where you're trying to take advantage of a clock roll, and then it becomes like, hey, enough of that. The first one was maybe an accident. This one is a trend. Then we're going to nip that in the bud. So that rule is now, that's officially good to go, right, Tom? That starts this week in terms of giving the offense the option to either take the play or put the time back on the clock, or both.
Yeah, that sounds like that goes into effect this week. So, yeah, I mean, that's in and of itself, I'm sure this is, wonderful comfort for Ohio State fans that this issue has now been addressed. But, it is, I think it probably does sort of drive home the fact that this was somewhere in the middle of, boy, what a clever play, and boy, this is really sort of unsporting. Because I saw a lot of very spirited debates on that front, and it's like, yeah, it is a really clever thing, but very clearly that was absolutely not the intention of the governing body. And for them to take that kind of step in the middle of the season, this is like when the Big Ten jumped in last year with the Connor Stallions thing. It's like, in and of itself, the fact that they're jumping in right now and going to these lengths in the middle of the week between games, that tells you how seriously they're taking it and how much they don't want that to be something that impacts games in the future. And again, that's another one of those like little things. That little thing cost Ohio State, the fact that, you brought this up, the fact that they could then play much tighter on Jeremiah Smith. So therefore, you didn't have the pickup of 10 yards or whatever it might have been on that play. So all these little things added up in a game that ended up as a 1-point loss. Not all of that stuff is presumably going to go wrong or go against Ohio State in the next game. So, sure, other stuff. Tony, I'm a Mets fan. You don't need to explain to me that other stuff can always go wrong. I'm a Blue Jackets fan. Same, very much the same. But yeah, you figure at some point that stuff is not all going to go in one direction in the most crucial moments.
And then the last thing for me here is Day was asked about, was there any discussion to go for 2 after the last touchdown? And he basically said the same thing that we had said, that, and the quote was, at that moment, I felt like it was still early. So there was, I think it was 9 minutes to go in the third quarter. Still a lot of game left. He said if it was the fourth quarter and there was 9 minutes to go, they'd probably go for it. They felt like there was going to be more scoring going on. If there wasn't as much scoring going on, they would have definitely thought harder about going for 2 at that moment. But at that point, when we said it after the game and we've continued to say it, it just felt like that wasn't going to be the end of the scoring. And so why start chasing anything now? And so that's why they didn't. And it was the flow of the game type of thing. If it had been Iowa, or you're like, things are very slow and you're scratching for everything. When you're scratching for every single point, then you've got an opportunity. You're probably going to take it for a 2. But the way this one was, it was 2 teams just throwing haymakers. So like, I don't think you're worried so much about a little left-handed jab.
No, that was a point at which and that's interesting that that's what he said, because that was almost verbatim what I put on our board when someone asked about it on Monday or Tuesday. They had scored, the 2 teams combined had scored 50 points, I think, at that point in the first 35 minutes of the game. So at that point, if you had told Ryan Day there were only going to be 13 more points scored in this game in the last 25 minutes, yeah, that might be a different decision. But at that point of the game, you're assuming, okay, 50 points in the first 25 minutes, you're probably going to get another 30 points in the last 25 minutes. I mean, that's probably give or take about what you're going to expect. It didn't play out that way. The second half slogged down quite a bit, and each team only got, 4 possessions in the second half. So the second half was a very different game than the first half and much, much lower scoring. So yeah, in retrospect, you can go back and go, yes, of course they should have done it. But at that moment, there was no real reason to expect that was going to be how the game was going to swing. And to your point, yeah, it's just, that's a little early to go for it, because you either want to go for 2 very early in the game and, do the old Chip Kelly score on the opening drive and get the 2-point conversion, and then you're up by 1 immediately, and then the other team is chasing it the whole game. Or you wait until the very end of the game, and on your last score, going for 2 in overtime if you're the underdog, or going for 2 in the final minute when you're the underdog, something like that. If you can go for 2 with 7 seconds left in the game, yeah, that's one of the most effective times to go for it. or in overtime. If you go for it earlier in the game, in the third quarter, when the other team has plenty of opportunity to come back and adjust to it and adjust their scoring to match that, going for 2 is still a less than 50% play on the whole. So you're taking a little bit of a risk, and because there's still so much time left in the game, it's not as beneficial as it is if you go for it right at the end of the game and the other team doesn't have time to sort of adjust their strategy to the fact that you've done it.
So that's all I've got, Tom. Do you have anything you wanted to throw in there, or are we good?
We're good.
All right, Tom. If you don't want to throw anything else in, then we'll just go ahead and wrap this show up. We appreciate you hitting the thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube. We always do. Thank you for that. And if you have not yet subscribed to the channel at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle, do so now. Hit the bell to be notified when we drop videos, go live, all sorts of things like that. And of course, continue to please find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a premium member. It is a fantastic way to support what we do. So 5 stars, 5-star rating interviews also welcome on however you get your podcast. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.